Eliminate the workplace excuse. That's what leaders do. This is the Career Blind Spot Podcast.
Today's CBQ, why is being a conscious entrepreneur not the default?
Will, do you want me to answer that as soon?
Yeah. No, let's contemplate on it.
Yeah, let's sit with that for a while. Well, I think there's three reasons. One is that we are, by the systems that we're in, divided.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't really even know what consciousness is. You know, they see it as like a woo-woo thing. So that's one, that we're sort of split, or we see it as like something we do after we create wealth.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one reason. The second reason is, I blame white liberals for this,
Okay.
is that there's this, there's a something that's true, which is when you raise your consciousness, it always comes with like a social justice component. You're more situationally aware, you're more socially aware. However, that does not make it incompatible with capitalism. It makes it incompatible with extractive capitalism. But I think that the second bias that people have is that that being an entrepreneur and being conscious are naturally in conflict. And I say they're naturally not.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurism is a natural state of the human being.
So
Every human being is an entrepreneur.
This is a teaser for our spinoff podcast that we were debating of reviving and renaming. But I think you're wrong. No. I think the second one is more of the answer of like, people think I am conscious, altruistic, empathetic. You know, you're Bill Gates. Oh, he's so generous, you know, billions of dollars later. And not to knock him, but it's like, I don't think everyone needs to be a billionaire before they start being altruistic.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that's the opposite of what any religion that really is trying to create more, you know,
Right.
kind humans. But I do think it's like, I'll do it later. I'll brush my teeth tomorrow. I'll go to the gym later.
Yeah, you'll go to the gym later. And so just to recap that.
Or real quick,
uh-huh.
Justin Foster, returning guest. If you've been listening, we're probably around close to episode 200, if not by now. Really good friend. I was his best man at his wedding. He is currently visiting here in Phoenix right before it gets too dang hot. But you have Massive now, or no, you've had Massive. I think you had just started it last episode right before my kid came. And you have your blog on Substack. What's it called, Foster?
The Third Way.
Third Way.
Mm-hmm.
So check out his content. I'll put in the show notes. But sorry, interrupted you. But
That's
bring
okay.
it back on track.
Yeah, so I just wanted to recap, you know, the answer to your question is that, number one, most people don't really know what it means to be conscious. The systems that we're in do not encourage it, and they encourage us to be split. There's a significant bias, especially with people with more left views, that consciousness and capitalism or consciousness and entrepreneurism are incompatible.
Yeah.
And I refute all three of those, but that answers your question about why it's not the default.
What?
There's no motivation, like social pressure for it to be the default.
But, okay.
Yeah, because, you know, you look at it from a complexity science standpoint, you either need to have steady pressure, like steady, consistent pressure on the system to change, or you need a shocking event. Well, neither of those have happened to make consciousness and entrepreneurism the default. There is no steady pressure. There is no expectation from most people. If you don't know what consciousness is, if you don't believe it's compatible with capitalism to begin with, and number three is the systems you're in discourage it,
but I guess
where's the pressure going to come from?
These are the reasons, but I refute those.
No, what I'm saying is if I was to go down the line, people have a misunderstanding of what consciousness is. The systemic reason is also flippable, and then it's easy to refute that the claim or the bias that capitalism and consciousness are not compatible. It's easy to refute that.
Refute it.
Well, John Mackey did the best job in his book Conscious Capitalism, which has been that brand of conscious capitalism is sort of don't outsource your idea to somebody else to execute, because he gave conscious capitalism as a brand to these chapters and stuff, and it's a shit show.
I went to a couple. I wouldn't say I was not. I was bored.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in church a little bit more interesting because it was about things I was more interested in.
Yeah.
But I want to say I'm hung up on it. If it's like the incompatibility of what I was raised on, faith, Christianity specifically, but you know I was also raised by, or not raised, in a Mormon neighborhood, even though I didn't go to a Mormon church. I was raised in Catholic. But hearing the people who said, hey, we believe in this, and business, I was like, these are not as simpatico as I
Yes.
think. But to your point, I realized, oh no, they can be. But maybe this is more. I'm curious if you refute. It makes it harder. If El Chapo really was going to be a good Christian in terms of his own definition of that, I think selling drugs in a mass cartel becomes a lot more challenging.
That's true. And I also think that when you don't know what consciousness is, that's kind of the starting point. A lot of people think consciousness is like a woo-woo thing, or they think it's something else, when really it's just awareness.
Yeah, but why are we talking about this other than we find it interesting? You said something to me last night where you were like, you help people who are like, they did everything right.
Mhm.
They're successful. They have the 401k, but they're like, what the hell?
Mhm.
I'm stuck. I'm, golden parachute or
Mhm.
something worse. And it's like, yes, I feel like I make the time for everyone. As a business owner, that's not necessarily the best. But if I'm going to grow and scale, it's like, I want to help. The best people that I'm going to be compatible with are the people who did the old version. I'll call it lowercase capitalism or entrepreneurism or entrepreneur. But they're like, I don't know what fulfillment looks like.
Right.
And to your point, I was like, no, actually, I'll use something maybe a little bit more simplified. If you're a real entrepreneur, you look more like an artist. You make quality products.
Right.
It's a nuanced experience. But on the other side, if you're a true artist, you sell your art.
Yeah.
Not just making it and passionate and being a snob about it.
There's a business model on the other side of it. Now, it can't be the only reason.
Mhm.
Rick Rubin does a great job with this, talking about this in his book, The Creative Act. But I also look at back to the point about proof. B Corps outperform non-B Corps.
Yeah.
Brands like Patagonia, which very much take a stand. Companies that have embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion in spite of current administration have done their business, like a Costco as an example. Their business has thrived.
Yeah.
That's only one kind of consciousness, though. So I think it's important to say, what do we mean by consciousness? And I think there are three kinds. I think there's sort of, let's call it mental or intellectual consciousness. This is the stuff that Sam Harris talks about. And this is the stuff of like being aware that you are not your thoughts and feelings. It's that moment of being present. That's like where you are basically, you become healthily non-attached to your ego. That is the first step for many people to do that. And that's like a mind-blowing thing when people realize that you're not your thoughts and feelings, you're not your identity. One of the questions I like to ask people when I'm doing this kind of work with them is, who are you without any of the labels? And one time I was coaching someone and I asked him that, and he almost got triggered and he started to melt down a little bit. And he goes, well, what if I don't like who would I find out who I am after that? And so it was that fear. And all that fear is being used to sort of manipulate you into buying shit you don't need and being with people you don't really want to be with, and what I call the hologram.
Yeah.
The second kind of consciousness is what's called spiritual consciousness. And this is the most difficult one to explain. But these are most commonly are what are called awakenings. And it's in the Bible. There's Saul who became Paul on the road to Damascus, and he had this like epiphany. Near-death experiences are like that for many people. I had one in 2014 that was truly a spiritual experience. I don't understand how it works, but it is a thing.
Yeah.
And then there's a third one, which is social consciousness. Social consciousness is, you could also call that empathy. So when you hear like Elon Musk shitting on empathy, that shows that's a lack of social consciousness, because it buys into the illusion that we're all separate.
Yeah.
Instead of we're all interconnected. And humans are interesting because we're autonomous beings with our own identity and own individualism, own personhood, but we're still interconnected. And so essentially, another way to look at social consciousness, you could also call it systemic consciousness. Like that my behavior affects other people.
Yeah.
Or having empathy for someone else's situation and understanding that that's all part of it. But any one of those can create this greater awareness that as an entrepreneur, who I am as a soul, what my skills are, what my offerings are all integrated. And again, that takes a shit ton of work to do.
Well, I would go back to the first one of we don't really understand what it means, and even something more from consciousness, but empathy. My Princess Bride quote, we keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Yes.
And I think even the most patient person lacks a lot of self-empathy or self-compassion. And like when you talk about the ego stuff, you aren't your thoughts. And that's like, we can say it, but to really detach, and that is a skill that it's a reverse skill of letting go of this thing versus, I think to me, that's capitalism is the linear, go to the gym, do your reps. That's the old version, which I realize I don't want that. I've never been that. I can see people will look at me like I have two heads when I describe my business of the last 14 years and liking spending time with my wife and kids. But at the same time, I'm like, I probably could put the reps in more and blah, blah, blah. But doing things in this more, I don't know, feminine energy, chaotic way or non-linear,
right.
Making podcasts, collaborating with you. You know, we were working on something that's coming up together and later this summer, making real cash money, not just preaching. And I think that's the other part of it. So like with DEI and things that I'm supportive of, I'm like, there's people who are talking about it. But what I want to know are, where are the success stories where it's proven that it's better? Because if I were to take 100 people that I love or at least am fans of and say, here, you start a business and now you hold yourself to the same standards that you expect of everyone else, I think they would crumble. Not that they couldn't do it, but it's already hard enough to make money. To do it with these higher values, I think it's always worth it. But I kind of get why they're like, I just need money right now.
Well, I mean, I think mostly it's because the algorithm is not really set up to tell the stories of brands, of small business owners and entrepreneurs that are conscious. So you got to do it yourself. You got to do your own branding yourself.
Yeah.
I have a tool that I use. So I have this whole model called Ethos, and it's this idea that being an entrepreneur and being a brand is a set of spiritual practices, and there's 7 of them. Well, the starting one is around brand clarity. And so I just want to break it down here because this is a nice kind of like, it dovetails very nicely with this conversation. And I use, in each of the practices, I use a triangle. It's a triangulation for various reasons. And the triangulation here, and I'll send you the graphic. You can put it in the show notes or whatever you want to do with it, is number 1 is moral clarity. So moral clarity becomes the inner compass. So I would say this: you cannot have moral clarity and be and you can't have a lack of moral clarity and also be conscious. It's not really consciousness. You
can't have moral clarity and be greedy.
That you can be greedy, but at least you're still aware of it. That it's like a temporary feeling sometimes, not a behavior. So you're aware of your own intentions.
Yeah.
So, but moral clarity or ethical clarity, kind of the same thing in this case. There are people that they claim to be conscious, but if they don't have moral clarity, then it's a grift. And the whole wellness industry is full of these assholes, unfortunately. You have to know moral clarity. You have to know what you actually believe, what you take a stand for, what you'd be willing to commit civil disobedience over. This is where it starts to break down, because in David Hawkins's map of consciousness, the middle is courage. That's the middle of the line. If you don't have courage, you're not even in the middle of consciousness. You're down if you drop below that. And so moral clarity is the beginning of courage a lot of times, because you have to know what you're willing to take a stand, especially fighting authoritarianism and apathy, which are the 2 greatest enemies of conscious entrepreneurism, by the way.
Yeah.
The second one is scalable genius. And the scalable genius is, you don't have to be, you said this a little bit earlier, that if you're an entrepreneur, you're really an artist or a creative, thinking that way, which means you're always working on your craft. You're always trying to get better, always trying to find the edge. And within that, you're trying to scale it. So let's take Kendrick Lamar. I would consider him a conscious entrepreneur. So he's making the same kind of music that he did when he was just, it was like recorded on a MacBook somewhere, but he's doing it now at the Super Bowl and huge stages. He's figured out how to scale his genius.
Yeah.
Now, the music industry kind of creates a pathway for that. But anybody that has a set of talents that can be monetized can scale that. Just a matter of being creative about it. Most people don't think that. They get locked in, like, this is what I do. And they mistake talent or genius for skill. I know how to sell life insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hard to scale that unless you build a business with a bunch of life insurance agents.
Yeah.
And then at the top of the triangle is impact. And this is another thing where it starts to break down. Impact has to be twofold. There has to be the impact. It has to work for you. It has to produce wealth, let's say. Maybe it doesn't make you rich, because maybe being rich to you is having time. You get your time back. What was the term you came up with? Fuck you time?
People say, fuck you money. And I was like, I've always been really great personally at F you time.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. Even if you don't have the F you money, I was like, especially if Justin says, you've done everything right, but you're kind of stuck. this is a cheap plug for my coaching, but it's like you can carve out the time. Not saying it's easy, but it's there.
Right.
And that I don't think people realize how much FU time they could be tapping.
In the book, The Soul of Money, she talks a lot about this. Like, there's nothing wrong with money. It's a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're insecure, which really means you're just listening to your ego, because if we just listen to our soul, we'd never be insecure. If you have imposter syndrome, which just means you're listening to your ego, you would know that you would hold your value. You could decide to lower your rates or something like that if you wanted to for a particular reason, but you don't doubt your value.
Yeah.
And so let's call that that's like the wealth of your own scalable genius, let's call it. But then there's the impact out in the world. And this is where entrepreneurs can make the biggest change, or they can have the biggest impact. Reagan once said the best social program is a job.
I'm just kidding.
The best social program is a job. If you're if you're an entrepreneur, a conscious entrepreneur, and you're creating jobs for people, especially if they can be seen and heard, they feel safe, can grow their skills, that is extraordinary. No government can ever do that. No government can do what an entrepreneur does for the self-worth of someone else. Number two is you are creating a model for people to follow. That is impact. And so we quote now John Mackey, or we talk about Patagonia, or we talk about Ben and Jerry's. You become the model that other people follow. That's an amazing legacy to have. That's impact. But if you don't have moral clarity and you don't have scalable genius, you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to have what I call brand clarity, which is those three things. Yeah. If you're a conscious entrepreneur, those three things still work. If you're not a conscious person, to a large extent, you can't be an asshole.
Well, I was going to say, like, I don't want to, the government thing, I wouldn't say a hard no, but I'm like, there was a resistance of, because I'm like, imagine if we had more conscious politicians, which kind of, my point. And so I think the way you feel about that is the way a lot of people feel about entrepreneurs and business owners.
Right.
But they're the same humans, and they just have jobs, and they have paychecks, and they're incentivized. It's whether it's the Girl Scouts or whatever. But what you said, I think, is the key, because I'm going to ask you a question that I think will be a good cap, not ending, but just to bring everything together. When you are conscious, when you are, we keep using conscious, and actually even the word entrepreneur, for those who listen, I'm like, even leader, to me, I do agree with you about like everyone should be an entrepreneur, but I was like, I think everyone should be a leader. And by that, it's you got to know your values, find a way that you can get by, and just whatever the word is, put that hat on. Getting away from your ego, separating, or realizing you're not your thought. It's like, I think that's all self-compassion is. It's that it's a skill that if you've seen it demonstrated or you can learn it, but so many people don't do it. And so many people are good at making money, but at the other end, there are other people who are not good at making money. And what'd you say, white liberals, or like your starving artist or whatever. There are people who get on their virtue signaling, high horse, but at the end of the day, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're scrambling. I wouldn't call them conscious, even though they might talk about wars or injustices, etc.
Social awareness, caring about social issues, does not make you a conscious person. But if you're a conscious person, you do have social awareness.
Yes,
it's part of the kind of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I didn't say everyone should be an entrepreneur. I said everyone is born an entrepreneur. If you look at children, we're watching your littles, especially your little boy, and Conan, and he's a 2.5-year-old entrepreneur. The way that he's thinking and creating and imagining.
Yeah.
And what we do is then we tell people that that's not a viable path. Maybe that's true too, but we don't have systems that encourage entrepreneurism. Like the current system that we have in the United States around standardized testing, everything is like the opposite of teaching entrepreneurism. You may have parents or a parent or a mentor that is an entrepreneur, but it's all sort of like out of the system learning it. Imagine what would happen if there were more entrepreneurs, and more people that had ownership over their own lives related to entrepreneurism. There would be a ripple effect that would be a direct threat to what I refer to as the controlling institutions, or government, religion, and education, and media to a large extent. Yeah,
capitalism,
which is extractive capitalism.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I point out that if you follow the rules of extractive capitalism, yes, that's true. It's very difficult to be conscious. And I remember a while ago, I was teaching personal branding workshop to a bunch of Verizon people. And there was one guy, and I noticed he had the beads, the wooden beads on his wrists. I was like, that's interesting, at a corporate gig. This is like 15 years ago. And he had a book about meditation. And he was like, pretty high up in the company. He had a book of meditation sitting next to him. And I struck up a conversation with him about that. And he goes, it's so this place doesn't destroy me.
Yeah.
And it's like, that was, to me, I'll always remember that's really, when you decide to be an entrepreneur, you're leaving that system, that extraction system. But if you're going to be, if you are a conscious entrepreneur, you don't really decide to become one, decide to become conscious.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
if you do that, you are no longer trying to survive in a system. You are trying to create your own way of doing things.
But I think that's the answer. That's why we don't have it. It's maybe not easier, but more accessible to survive in a pre-existing system versus your own. If you're in the middle of the ocean and there's a shitty boat, let's climb on that versus let me make friends with a whale and get to whatever.
Right.
But let's kind of bring this home. Here's my question that might open up. We can go a few more minutes. But do you think, I don't know how many more billionaires we have today versus like 20 years ago.
A lot more.
But let's say all of them had more, maybe not just meditation books, because Silicon Valley showed us that, it's like going to church doesn't necessarily mean it hits. But if they actually were conscious becoming billionaires, do you think we'd still have billionaires?
Well,
the amount of billionaires.
I think being a billionaire is an anomaly.
Mm-hmm.
It's the result of the model of capitalism that we have. If there shouldn't be any billionaires, but
sure,
that's a systemic thing. This is what happens, though, is you do get the Richard Bransons, or my favorite is like Mark Cuban. I don't know if he's a conscious guy.
Yeah,
but I do know that he gives a shit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. He gives a shit about, and he came up, and this is an interesting little statistic. I did some research on this. The billionaires that became billionaires because they were raised in the system that produced billionaires. They went to the right schools, to the right people and everything, almost universally Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm.
The billionaires that became billionaires in the system, same system related to capitalism, but they did it, and they went to like Indiana State, or you look at the other billionaires, Oprah, Taylor Swift, Dr. Dre, almost universally anti-Trump.
Dr. Dre's not a real doctor.
Yeah. And so my point to that is there's something about if you're raised, you may have a net worth of a billionaire, but you're going to do very different things with your money if you start off as a conscious entrepreneur and you somehow become a billionaire.
Well, I don't think there shouldn't not be billionaires. I just think it's very interesting that there's more and more. I'd like to think if I had $1 billion, I'd be doing things differently. But also, if I had $1 billion, I'd already be a pretty different person. But what I care more about is those of us who are making good livings, we're good at what we do, but we're burnt out, etc. I think we think we're conscious, but you said this yesterday. You can't really define faith or tell. How'd you say it?
You can't teach people faith.
And so you have these people that I want to say they're virtue signaling, but you're one of these people that I'm talking to you, a hypothetical person, that you're good at your job, you care about people, but like you're like that person with the meditation book of like, I don't want this place to destroy me. I don't think they are conscious, or that sounds like that guy is, but being insecure and being humble are very different things. And so it's easy to be like billionaires or my boss or the owner of the company. But if you're a conscious person, I think at the very least you lead your life as much as you can and you don't waste energy on things, or at least you catch yourself doing that. And I think the world would be a way better place if more of us weren't waiting for the paycheck to come in.
But I also think it's a little bit of a distraction.
What is?
This idea is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're a conscious person and you want to have the three. You want to have the moral clarity, the scalable genius, and the impact. Impact being both wealth and social impact. Don't worry about being a billionaire.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's not, if it happens, it happens. You worry about being joyful. You worry about what I call horizontal ROI. So you practice horizontal ROI. This is that it's more valuable to you to say no to something that is, it's more valuable to you to spend time with your kids than go chase another contract just because, you're supposed to. That's what I call horizontal ROI, because it's opening up what's already there.
Elon would call it horrible ROI.
Yeah,
time with my kids.
So,
but no, I think actually the thing that, as you described that, guilty pleasures. No, when you're conscious, they're just pleasures.
They're just pleasures.
You enjoy.
And sometimes they're decadent pleasures, sure.
Yeah.
And it's also here's how you know also you're a conscious entrepreneur is that you don't go around telling people you're a conscious entrepreneur.
Yeah. And I think you could also swap that in for feminism, Christianity, patriot,
yeah, all of that stuff.
Yeah. It's your bull rider energy.
Yes, bull riders or snipers.
Yeah.
That if you ever meet a bull rider or a sniper, they will not tell you they are those things.
Yeah.
And so on my kind of last final thought here is every human is born with the capacity to become conscious. It's part of the evolutionary DNA that we have. It's not. And number two is if we're also all born entrepreneurs, it is my very deep belief, and I could do probably a book about this.
Yeah.
That the future of systems, the things that are really going to shake things up, are going to be conscious entrepreneurs doing things their way in a way that benefits society.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the replacement for all these broken systems that we have.
I was like, it's creators.
Yes.
If you create something, not that AI can replicate, but you truly, whether it's an experience, a product, I think I agree. We all want to do that, but also truly creating, like I used to think, or I was like, oh yeah, if you're rich, now you have time to be an artist, or you're a starving artist. It's like, no, if I'm enjoying my art, it is, I think it's no, I forget who the artist is, but it's like art critics talk about theme and this and that. Real artists talk about where you can buy cheap turpentine.
Yes.
And I'm like, we all want to make stuff. It's frustrating. And you find a way to do the work to pay for the work you actually care about.
You can't do this whole thing about starving artists and the market, and you get sort of this arrogance and everything. No. The greatest branders of all time were the spiritual masters. Jesus, Buddha, Rumi. That's not an accident. So you imagine taking the principles of what I call ethos and applying them to your business, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And you apply that to your business. If you're not a successful conscious entrepreneur, it's because you suck at marketing and branding. That's it.
I make this show for leaders, those who don't point fingers, but point towards ways they can do better at work. My ask for listening is you share the show on social and/or with other leaders, established or aspiring. Until then, no talent, no culture, no excuses.